They told us the Jedi were the good guys, peacekeepers of the galaxy, defenders of the innocent, but something about that never fully added up. You've got an entire army of bald space monks with laser swords who can move objects with their minds, and we're just supposed to trust that they're always the calm, reasonable ones. That's like giving toddlers flamethrowers and calling them firefighters because they promise not to burn stuff. And let's not pretend they didn't have some serious red flags. They basically kidnapped kids, called it training, and then raised them in a no-feelings-allowed zone like some kind of emotionless wizard boot camp. Love was banned, attachment was dangerous, and expressing feelings was a one-way ticket to the dark side. Yeah, because history totally shows that bottling emotions never backfires. Meanwhile, their big plan to keep the galaxy safe was to sit in a giant space temple and meditate, while evil literally crawled through the front door wearing a Senate robe and waving to the camera. Palpatine didn't even try to hide it. The guy cackled like a cartoon villain, and somehow the most powerful Force users in existence were just like, curious, but let's not act on it just yet. You'd think after 1 or 2 betrayals maybe the Jedi would update their playbook. But nope. Same rigid rules, same arrogant speeches, same we know best attitude, while everything around them collapsed like a bad Jenga tower. They were so focused on preserving their sacred order, they didn't notice it turning into a cautionary tale. And the irony is, we bought it for years. We cheered when they lit their sabers, we cried when they fell, we quoted their broken philosophy like it was gospel. But behind all the wisdom and lightsaber flips was a system built on denial and fear disguised as discipline. The Jedi weren't just flawed, they were a slow-motion disaster waiting to happen. In this video, we're pulling back the curtain on everything you thought you knew about the Jedi. We'll break down their mistakes, their blind spots, and the dangerous ideals they clung to while the galaxy burned. From their most questionable choices to the characters who saw the truth before it was too late. This is the other side of the Force you were never supposed to see. So let's just ask the question out loud. Were the Jedi ever actually the good guys? I mean, yeah, they had lightsabers and sweet robes and talked about peace a lot. But if you actually look at how they operated, you start seeing cracks in that polished Jedi temple marble real quick. They sat on thrones like space wizards, making decisions for the galaxy while claiming to be humble servants, which already sounds like the start of a bad sci-fi cult. And the way they recruited Jedi, that's another red flag. They straight up stole babies from their families. Sure, they called it identifying Force sensitivity, but let's not sugarcoat it. Imagine a monk showing up at your door and saying your toddler has potential, so they'll be whisked away for training where they'll never see you again. It's like Hogwarts meets child custody court. Then there's their famous no attachments rule, which basically means no love, no family, no emotional connections of any kind. That's not balance. That's emotional suppression with extra steps. They taught literal children to repress every feeling and then handed them laser swords and said, go bring peace to the galaxy. What could possibly go wrong, right? Even when war broke out, they jumped into it without hesitation. For a group that preached serenity, they became generals pretty fast. They led clones into battle, made decisions that cost lives, and still insisted they were peacekeepers. That's like if Gandhi took over a tank division and said, don't worry, it's for non-violence. So yeah, the deeper you dig, the more it feels like the Jedi Order was less a noble group of protectors, and more a bureaucratic monk club with god complexes. And honestly, that changes how you see the whole Star Wars saga. Let's talk about the Jedi Council, because, wow. If you ever wanted to see a group of people completely out of touch with reality, this is it. These were supposed to be the wisest beings in the galaxy, yet they made decision after decision that blew up in everyone's faces. Literally sometimes. They sensed something was off with Anakin from day one. And instead of guiding him, they shoved him aside like a broken droid. They told him to bury his feelings, then acted shocked when he snapped. That's like telling someone to never talk about their trauma, then wondering why they're not okay. After losing their mum and watching their world burn. And don't even get me started on how they handled the Clone Wars. Instead of investigating why there was suddenly a massive army of genetically engineered soldiers, conveniently ready to go, they just said cool and put on their general capes. The Jedi became military commanders overnight, and somehow didn't think, maybe, just maybe, this was a trap. You ever notice how every Jedi story ends in loss? Not triumph? Not just in the movies either. Pick any era, and you'll see the same pattern. Jedi rise, Jedi fall, and someone gets left behind in the wreckage. It's not just tragedy, it's a cycle of devastation. Look at Ahsoka, trained by Anakin, abandoned by the Council, and eventually walked away from the Order. Not because she turned evil, but because the Jedi couldn't admit they were wrong. She's one of the few who saw the problem from inside, and had the strength to leave. But it cost her everything. Then there's Qui-Gon Jinn, a Jedi who dared to question the system, who believed in balance, not bureaucracy. And what happened to him? cut down by a Sith, while the Council ignored his warnings. If they had listened, maybe the entire Clone Wars could have been avoided, but they were too proud to consider they might be wrong. And what about Luke in The Last Jedi? Broken, bitter, and isolated. He saw what the Jedi had become and chose to end the cycle, even if it meant becoming the villain in the eyes of history. That's heavy. To be the hero of one trilogy and the cautionary tale of the next. The Jedi didn't just lose battles, they lost themselves. And along the way they dragged entire civilizations down with them. For all their faults though, you can't deny the Jedi were uninspiring. There's something about seeing a lightsaber ignite in silence that still gives chills. Despite their rigid rules and tragic missteps, there's a beauty in the way they tried to live by a higher code. Think of Obi-Wan Kenobi, exiled, heartbroken and hunted, but still stood up against Darth Vader on the Death Star. Not because he thought he'd win, but because he believed in hope. That moment hit harder because of everything he had already lost. And Yoda, as cryptic and frustrating as he was, he symbolized a kind of ancient wisdom that still resonates. His teachings might have been flawed, but there's power in the idea that peace is a choice, that mastering yourself is the hardest battle of all. Even when they fell, they inspired others to rise. Rey Cal Kestis, even Grogu, all touched by Jedi teachings, but not bound by their mistakes. They show that the philosophy wasn't inherently wrong, it just needed to evolve. The tragedy of the Jedi is they reached for greatness, but clung to a structure that couldn't bend. And yet, they still lit the way for future generations. Here's where things get interesting. Because even though the Jedi fell, what rose from their ashes was something new, something better. The old order crumbled, but its values, courage, discipline, empathy, they didn't vanish. They just needed new hands to carry them. The blueprint stayed, but the builders changed, and that made all the difference. Think about Luke's final act, projecting himself across the galaxy not to kill, but to inspire. That's a Jedi. Not someone who swings a saber, but someone who protects life even when it costs their own. That scene rewrote what strength looked like in Star Wars, and it proved that victory isn't always about defeating someone, it's sometimes just about showing up. Then there's Ahsoka again, wandering the galaxy, not as a Jedi, but as something freer, wiser. She still fights for peace, still helps people, but on her own terms. She represents what the Jedi could have been if they weren't so obsessed with titles and councils. Her journey shows you can reject the system without abandoning the cause. We even see it in the newer generation. Characters like Ezra Bridger, who trained without a council, who found guidance in unlikely places. It shows you don't need a temple to follow the light, just the will to do what's right. His story proves that heart and hope can grow in the cracks the old Jedi left behind. The Force doesn't belong to the Jedi, it's in everyone, in everyday choices, in people who stand up when it's easier to stay silent. That's the future of Star Wars. And honestly, that's way more interesting than a dusty council chamber. Maybe the best Jedi are the ones who never called themselves Jedi at all. In the end, the Jedi weren't evil, but they weren't heroes either. They were flawed beings trying to uphold an impossible ideal in a galaxy that kept shifting beneath their feet. And that blind devotion, that refusal to change, is what doomed them. They were trapped by their own legend and too proud to break free. Their downfall wasn't just Palpatine or Order 66, it was arrogance. They thought they had all the answers. They thought the light side made them invincible. But you can't claim to protect balance when you refuse to acknowledge darkness even exists. Ignoring the shadows only made them grow stronger in silence. And yet, even in failure, there's something to learn. The Jedi remind us that wisdom without humility is dangerous, that good intentions can still lead to destruction, and that tradition should never outweigh compassion. Sometimes the greatest mistake is believing you're beyond making one. Their legacy is complicated, which is exactly what makes it compelling. You don't need to see them as saints or villains, just people, trying, failing, sometimes rising, sometimes breaking, but always striving to be better. Their story is messy and painful, but that's why it feels so real. Thank you for watching the whole video. I make videos because of my love for Star Wars and Marvel. I've been asked countless times how I get my subtitles, and I generate them automatically with a tool I built. That same tool can be used here on my website. It's completely free and doesn't require signing up. My website contains the subtitle generator that is perfect for any video, blogging post, where you can sign up with your email and receive notifications for when I post, and also my 3 channels. Critical Analysis Hub focuses on Star Wars and Marvel movies. Critical Analysis Hub Plus looks at Star Wars and Marvel shows. And Critical Analysis Hub XP centers on video games, like The Last of Us series, Jedi Survivor, and GTA 5. Thank you for being a fan.